The docking bay doors hissed open, and David Reed stepped onto orbital mining station Tertius 9 with a single travel bag slung over his shoulder. Around him, workers from 17 different species moved cargo containers and equipment with practiced efficiency. Most of them stopped to stare at the newcomer. David tried not to notice the whispers. A towering reptilian miner named Roth nudged his companion, a beetle-like creature with a glossy black carapace. They both looked at David the way someone might look at a child wandering into a construction site. "Is that the human?" Roth's voice carried across the bay despite his attempt at discretion. "Soft-skinned species," the beetle worker replied. "I give him 3 weeks before something kills him." David pretended not to hear. He had read the reports about mixed-species stations. Humans were still rare this far into the frontier territories. Most alien species had evolved on worlds much harsher than Earth. They had natural armor, redundant organs, or crystalline skin that could deflect impacts. Humans had none of these advantages. Commander HFY waited near the security checkpoint. The commander's body resembled a sculpture made of translucent crystal, with light refracting through geometric patterns. HFY's species came from a high-gravity world where atmospheric pressure could crush unprotected flesh. Their crystalline structure had evolved to withstand incredible force. "David Reed," HFY's voice sounded like wind chimes. "Your credentials are impressive for such a young species. I hope you understand the risks of working here." "I've reviewed all the safety protocols," David said. "I'm ready to start." HFY gestured toward the inner corridors. "We've assigned you to routine maintenance in the safer sections. No external work. No heavy machinery. Your physiology is too vulnerable for standard operations." David wanted to argue but knew better. He would have to prove himself first. He followed HFY through corridors lined with pipes and conduits, passing workers who towered over him or skittered along walls with multiple limbs. The medical bay occupied an entire section near the station's core. Dr. Quilvin, the chief medical officer, floated in a containment tank filled with nutrient gel. The doctor's gelatinous body pulsed with bioluminescent patterns as David approached. "Fascinating," Quilvin's voice emanated from a translation device mounted on the tank. "I've never examined a human before. Please step into the scanning chamber." David entered the cylindrical scanner. Beams of light swept over his body, while Quilvin made sounds that the translator rendered as thoughtful humming. "Remarkable," Quilvin said. "You have no exoskeleton at all. Your skin is barely thicker than tissue paper by galactic standards. A single layer of dermal protection. No subdermal armor plating. No redundant organs. How does your species survive?" "We're careful," David offered. "Careful won't help if a pressure seal fails or a tool slips," Quilvin said. "I'm logging you as high risk for any injury classification. Even minor accidents could be fatal for your biology." David changed into his work uniform and reported to his assigned section. The maintenance area hummed with activity. Other workers moved with casual disregard for safety measures that would terrify most humans. A 4-armed technician reached into an active power conduit without protection. His thick, rubber-like skin provided natural insulation. "You must be the fragile one," the technician said. "I'm Drex. Try not to die on your first day. The paperwork is annoying." David spent his shift checking pressure seals and monitoring system readouts. Simple work, well below his skill level, but he understood the logic. Nobody trusted the soft-skinned human with anything important yet. 3 hours into his shift, an alert flashed on his display. A support beam in the adjacent section showed stress fractures. David grabbed his toolkit and headed for the location. When he arrived, he found Roth examining the beam with a handheld scanner. "Thermal expansion," Roth said without looking up. "This whole section needs reinforcement. I'll file a report after my shift." "We should evacuate this area now," David said, checking his own readings. These fractures are propagating fast. Roth laughed. Soft skin, this beam could fall on my head and I'd barely feel it. My dermal plating can handle. The beam shrieked. Metal fatigue had reached critical mass. The massive support structure broke free from its moorings and swung downward directly toward Roth, who stood frozen in surprise. His species rarely worried about falling objects. David didn't think. He lunged forward and shoved Roth with all his strength. The larger alien stumbled aside just as the beam completed its arc. The edge caught David across his left forearm with a sickening crunch. Pain exploded through David's arm. He fell to his knees, cradling the injury. Through blurred vision, he saw bone protruding through torn skin. Blood spread across the floor in a growing pool. Roth stared in horror. Medical emergency, human down, human down. Within seconds, other workers crowded the corridor. Someone hit the emergency stop on all nearby equipment. Dr. Quilven's voice crackled over the intercom, demanding a status report. David tried to stay conscious. The pain was extraordinary, but he focused on breathing slowly. Around him, aliens whispered in their various languages. He caught fragments of translation. The bone is shattered. No species recovers from that kind of structural damage. He saved Roth's life. He won't survive the night. David wanted to tell them they were wrong, but darkness crept in from the edges of his vision. The last thing he heard before passing out was Roth's voice, thick with guilt and grief. The soft skin pushed me out of the way. He knew the beam would kill him. He did it anyway. Emergency medical drones arrived and carefully lifted David onto a transport stretcher. As they rushed him toward the medical bay, workers lined the corridors in silence. They had just watched what they believed was a death sentence delivered to the fragile human who had been on the station for less than 1 day. None of them knew what was about to happen next. Dr. Quilven worked quickly, but without hope. The medical bay's instruments displayed David's vital signs in colors the gelatinous doctor had never seen before. Human physiology was so different from the standard galactic baseline that half the equipment couldn't interpret the data correctly. David's left forearm looked like something from a nightmare. The radius bone had snapped completely, with one jagged end protruding through the skin. The ulna showed multiple fracture lines. Soft tissue damage extended from his wrist to his elbow. Blood still seeped from the wound despite the coagulation foam the emergency team had applied. "Can you save him?" Roth stood outside the sterile field, his scaled face tight with worry. "Save him?" Quilven's bioluminescence flickered with confusion. "I can make him comfortable. This injury has destroyed the structural integrity of his primary manipulator limb. Even if he survives the trauma and blood loss, the limb is permanently non-functional." Commander HFY entered the medical bay with several other department heads. They gathered around the observation window like mourners at a funeral. "How long does he have?" HFY asked. "Unknown," Quilven admitted. "Human medical data is limited, but no known species can recover from this level of skeletal damage. The bone matrix is completely compromised." Inside the sterile field, David's eyes fluttered open. Pain medication kept the worst at bay, but his face showed obvious discomfort. He looked at his arm, carefully wrapped and immobilized, then at the crowd of aliens watching him through the window. "Hey," he said, his voice weak but clear. "Did Roth get clear?" Quilven nearly dropped a medical instrument. "You're conscious and concerned about someone else. You should be in shock." "I am a little," David admitted. "But I've broken bones before. Is Roth okay?" "Broken bones before." Quilven moved closer, all professional interest now. "You've experienced this type of catastrophic structural failure previously." "Well, yeah, broke my collarbone when I was 12. Fractured my ankle at 15. This is my first compound fracture, though. It looks pretty bad." The aliens outside the window exchanged glances. HFY's crystalline body refracted light in sharp, confused patterns. "How did you survive those previous injuries?" Quilvin asked. "They healed," David said simply. "Bones are living tissue. They grow back together when they break. It takes a few weeks, but they regenerate." Silence filled the medical bay. Quilvin's translation device struggled to process the concept. Finally, the doctor spoke. "Regenerate? You mean your body rebuilds destroyed structural components?" "Sure. The broken ends start forming new bone tissue called callus. Eventually, it bridges the gap and solidifies. In a few months, you can't even tell where the break was." Quilvin turned to the observation window. "Commander, we need to document this. If what he's saying is true, human physiology operates on principles we've never encountered." Over the next 3 days, David became the most closely monitored patient in the station's history. Quilvin ran continuous scans, tracking every cellular change in the injured arm. The results defied everything the doctor knew about biology. At the fracture site, specialized cells called osteoblasts were multiplying rapidly. They secreted a protein matrix that began forming a bridge between the broken bone ends. Blood vessels sprouted through the damaged tissue, bringing nutrients and oxygen to fuel the repair process. "Impossible," Quilvin muttered, reviewing the scans for the 100th time. "He's growing new bone, actual new bone tissue." Roth visited every day, bringing food that David couldn't eat because it was toxic to human biology. The big reptilian always looked guilty, despite David's repeated assurances that he'd made the right choice. "My species doesn't heal like yours," Roth explained during one visit. "If I break something, it stays broken. We've evolved to be nearly unbreakable instead. But you're built to survive being broken." "Different strategies for the same problem," David said. "Your people developed armor. Mine developed repair mechanisms." News of David's condition spread throughout the station. Workers found excuses to pass by the medical bay, hopping to catch a glimpse of the regenerating human. The betting pools evolved from predicting David's death to wagering on how complete his recovery would be. After 2 weeks, Quilvin performed a structural integrity test on the healing bone. The callus formation had stabilized the fracture completely. New bone tissue was hardening at a rate the doctor found almost frightening. "At this rate, you'll have functional use of the limb within 6 weeks, Quilvin said. "Full structural integrity in 12 to 16 weeks. This is beyond remarkable." David smiled. "That's actually a pretty standard timeline for a fracture like this. Back on Earth, this wouldn't even make the news." "You mean this happens to humans frequently?" "Kids break bones all the time. Adults too, especially in physical jobs or sports. We just heal and move on." Commander HFY requested a formal meeting with David in the medical bay. The crystalline commander studied the human with new interest. "I owe you an apology," HFY said. "We assigned you to low-risk work because we thought you were fragile. We were wrong." "I am fragile," David corrected. "I just don't stay broken." After 3 weeks, David removed the immobilization brace during Quilvin's daily examination. The doctor protested immediately. "The bone hasn't finished remodeling. You need another 3 weeks of immobilization." David flexed his fingers carefully, then rotated his wrist. The movement was stiff but functional. "It's strong enough to bear weight now. I can start physical therapy and light-duty work." "You'll damage the repair tissue." "The movement actually helps the healing process. Bones respond to stress by getting stronger. If I baby it too much, it'll heal weak." David stood and began the paperwork to return to active duty. Quilvin sputtered protests but couldn't deny the medical scans. The bone had healed enough to support normal use, even if it wasn't yet at full strength. The next morning, David walked through the station corridors toward his assigned work area. Every alien he passed stopped to stare. The human who should have been crippled for life moved with only slight stiffness in his left arm. Roth met him at the maintenance section entrance. "You're really back," the big reptilian said. "Told you I would be. My people have a saying, what the universe breaks stays broken. I'm beginning to think humans have a different relationship with the universe." David picked up his toolkit with both hands, testing the grip strength in his formerly broken arm. It held firm. "We break," he said. "We just refuse to stay that way." 2 months passed since David's arm healed. The station's attitude toward him had shifted from pity to cautious curiosity. Workers no longer avoided him in the corridors. Some even asked questions about human biology during meal breaks, but most still believed the bone incident was a special case, possibly aided by advanced human medical technology nobody had seen. David didn't mind the skepticism. He focused on his work, gradually taking on more complex assignments as Commander HFY's confidence in him grew. Today's task involved repairing a sensor array in the outer maintenance ring, a section exposed to the vacuum of space and constant micrometeor activity. "You sure about this, soft skin?" Drex, the four-armed technician, checked David's pressure suit seals. "The outer ring takes a beating. We lose equipment out there all the time." "I've got the training," David said, "and the suit is rated for the environment." Drex made a sound that the translator interpreted as doubtful agreement. "Just remember, if something goes wrong out there, help is 10 minutes away minimum. My hide can take a few punctures. Yours can't." David cycled through the airlock with a tool kit magnetically secured to his belt. The outer ring stretched ahead of him, a curved corridor of exposed metal and flickering lights. Through the reinforced windows, he could see the asteroid field that the station mined, thousands of rocks tumbling in chaotic orbits. The damaged sensor cluster hung on the exterior hull, accessible through a maintenance hatch. David checked his suit's integrity one more time, then opened the hatch and climbed outside. Space surrounded him. Earthborn instincts screamed warnings about the infinite fall in every direction, but David had trained for this. He clipped his safety tether to the hull and pulled himself toward the sensor array. The damage was worse than the initial reports suggested. Micrometeor impacts had shredded 2 of the sensor panels completely. David began the tedious work of removing the destroyed components and installing replacements from his kit. He was halfway through the 3rd panel when his suit's collision alarm shrieked. David looked up and saw a cloud of debris tumbling directly toward his position. Someone in the mining section must have triggered an explosive charge without checking for personnel in the area. There was no time to reach the hatch. David pressed himself flat against the hull and hoped his suit could handle the impact. The debris cloud hit him like a sand blaster made of knives. Fragments ranging from dust-sized particles to fist-sized chunks tore past at orbital velocity. Pain erupted across David's left side. Something sharp had penetrated his suit and the flesh beneath. His heads-up display flashed red warnings about pressure loss and biological contamination alerts. He slapped an emergency patch over the largest tear in his suit, but blood was already spreading inside the fabric. "Breach, breach, I've got a suit breach," David gasped into his comm. "Returning to airlock now." He pulled himself along the hull hand over hand, leaving a trail of frozen blood droplets that glittered in the starlight. Each movement sent fresh waves of pain through his side. The lacerations felt deep, definitely into muscle tissue, possibly worse. Drex met him at the airlock, all 4 arms reaching to help David inside. "Don't look at the wound, don't look at it. Medical is on the way." But David had already looked. Through the torn suit, he could see 3 parallel gashes across his ribs and abdomen. The deepest cut exposed the pink-white gleam of muscle tissue. Blood welled up steadily, despite the clotting agents in his suit's first aid system. "Oh stars, Drex kept repeating. "I told them not to send the soft skin outside. This is exactly what I warned them about." Dr. Quilvin arrived with a full emergency team. They cut away David's suit and began treating the wounds. The gelatinous doctor's bioluminescence pulsed in rapid, anxious patterns. Multiple lacerations, severe tissue damage, possible internal injuries, Quilvin announced to the team. Prep for surgery. We'll need to. No surgery, David said through gritted teeth. Just clean it, close it, and watch for infection. You don't understand the severity. I understand I got cut. It's bad, but it's not fatal. Just treat it like you would a major laceration. Quilvin wanted to argue but remembered the broken arm. Instead, the doctor cleaned the wounds thoroughly, applied synthetic skin grafts to the deepest cuts, and sealed everything with medical adhesive. David received antibiotics and pain medication, then was confined to the medical bay for observation. Word spread quickly. The human had been torn open in the outer ring. Workers gathered outside the medical bay again, waiting for news of another disaster. Roth pushed through the crowd and stood at the observation window. David was sitting up in bed, looking pale but conscious. The big reptilian's face showed confusion rather than grief this time. "How are you not dying?" Roth asked when Quilvin allowed him inside. David lifted his shirt carefully to show the bandaged wounds. "They're deep, but they missed anything vital. The body can handle surface damage like this." "Surface damage? I can see where the cut went into your muscle layers." "Muscles heal too. They're just tissue. As long as the bleeding stops and infection doesn't set in, the body repairs it all." Over the following days, Quilvin documented the healing process with the same obsessive attention shown during the bone regeneration. The results were equally extraordinary. Human skin cells multiplied at an incredible rate, forming new tissue to bridge the gaps in the lacerations. Blood vessels sprouted through the damaged areas, bringing nutrients and immune cells. The muscle tissue underneath began knitting back together, fiber by fiber. "Your entire outer layer is designed to be temporary," Quilvin explained to a group of medical staff during a presentation. "Humans shed and replace their skin constantly. When damaged, this system accelerates. They don't just heal wounds, they rebuild the entire damaged section from scratch." Commander Atral attended the presentation and asked the question everyone was thinking. How many times can they do this? Is there a limit to human regeneration? Quilvin pulled up David's medical file. According to his records, he's experienced dozens of minor injuries throughout his life. Cuts, bruises, minor burns, small breaks. His body has repaired all of them. Some left scars, but all healed. After 2 weeks, David's wounds had closed completely. Pink scar tissue marked where the lacerations had been, but the structural integrity was sound. He could move without pain and passed all of Quilvin's strength tests. The doctor cleared him for light duty with obvious reluctance. David returned to work in the inner sections, but something had changed. Workers no longer looked at him with pity or contempt. They watched him with something closer to unease. The human had been broken twice now, in ways that would permanently cripple most species, and both times he'd simply healed and continued. Drex approached David in the maintenance section. "I've been thinking about what you said, about different survival strategies. My people don't heal because we don't break, but your whole species is built around breaking and fixing." David nodded. "We're fragile, we've always known that, so we evolved to survive our own fragility." "That's not fragile," Drex said quietly. "That's something else entirely." The emergency klaxon screamed through every corridor of the station. David was in his quarters, 3 hours into a sleep cycle, when the alarm dragged him awake. He checked his communicator and saw the code that made his blood run cold. Tunnel collapse in the deep mining section. Multiple casualties. All personnel report. He dressed in 30 seconds and ran toward the assembly point. Other workers converged from all directions, their faces showing varying degrees of concern. For most species on the station, mining accidents were serious but rarely fatal. Their natural armor protected them from cave-ins and crushing forces. Commander Atral stood in the central hub, coordinating rescue efforts. A holographic display showed the collapse zone, a section of tunnel 300 meters below the main station level. 6 miners were trapped behind tons of fallen rock. "We've got movement sensors showing all 6 are alive," Atral said, "but the main tunnel is completely blocked. It'll take days to clear with standard equipment." "What about the emergency access shafts?" someone asked. Atral highlighted several narrow passages on the display. "Too small. Even our smallest workers can't fit through in protective gear. We can get air and water to them, but extraction is impossible through those routes." David studied the hologram carefully. The emergency shafts were only 40 centimeters wide, designed for cable runs and sensor equipment, not rescue operations. But they did lead directly to the trapped miners. "I can fit through those shafts," David said. The room went silent. Every alien in the assembly turned to look at him. "Absolutely not," Atral said. "Those passages weren't designed for occupation. There's no structural support, toxic gas pockets, and unstable rock throughout. It's a death trap." "For most species, yes," David agreed. "But I don't need much space. I can compress my body enough to fit through, and I can navigate without heavy protective gear." Roth stepped forward. "Soft skin, those tunnels could collapse at any moment. If you get crushed down there, we can't even recover your body." David looked at the display showing the 6 trapped miners. Their life signs were stable for now, but the air quality readings were dropping steadily. In another 12 hours, they would start suffocating. "Do you have a better option?" David asked. Nobody answered. Commander Atral's crystalline body refracted light in sharp, angry patterns. "If I allow this and you die, it will be on my record forever. If you don't allow this and those 6 miners die, that will be on your record too," David said quietly. Atral stood motionless for a long moment, then gestured sharply. "Prep him, but if conditions become unsurvivable, he retreats immediately. No heroics." Dr. Quilvin outfitted David with a minimal pressure suit, barely more than a sealed jumpsuit with an air supply. The gelatinous doctor's bioluminescence flickered with worry. "This suit won't protect you from cave-ins," Quilvin said, "or toxic gases above certain concentrations, or extreme temperatures, or—" "I know," David said, "but it's what I can fit through those shafts wearing." They lowered him into the emergency access shaft on a cable harness. The passage was exactly as cramped as the schematics suggested. David had to exhale completely and compress his ribcage to squeeze through the narrowest sections. Rock pressed against him from all sides. His communicator crackled. "How are you doing this?" Drex's voice asked. "My people have rigid exoskeletons. We physically couldn't compress enough to fit." "Humans are flexible," David said, grunting as he pulled himself around a sharp corner. "Our skeletons are on the inside, and we've got soft tissue that can compress and shift, useful for getting into tight spaces." The shaft angled downward sharply. David wedged himself between the walls and inched forward. Twice, he had to remove his air tanks and push them ahead of him through sections too narrow to pass with them on his back. An hour into the descent, his communicator lit up with a warning. Toxic gas detected ahead. High concentrations of hydrogen sulfide. David checked his air supply. Enough for another 3 hours if he didn't waste it. He continued forward, breathing only from his tanks and trying not to think about what would happen if the seal on his suit failed. The shaft opened into a small cavity. David squeezed through and found himself in the collapsed tunnel section. Rock and debris filled most of the space, but he could hear voices on the other side of the pile. "Hello," David called out. "Rescue team is here. Can anyone hear me?" "We hear you," a voice responded, translated through David's suit comm. "But how did you get through? The main tunnel is blocked." "Emergency shaft. I'm going to start clearing a path to you. How many are injured? 2 unconscious, 4 mobile but trapped. We can't move the rock without equipment. David examined the debris pile. It consisted of loose rocks ranging from fist size to massive boulders. He started working, moving the smaller pieces first, creating a narrow channel through the pile. His hands bled inside his gloves within 15 minutes. The rocks were sharp and unforgiving. David ignored the pain and kept working. He could feel cuts opening on his palms and fingers, but stopping meant the trapped miners would die. After 2 hours, he'd created a gap barely large enough for a person to squeeze through. One of the trapped miners, a beetle-like creature named Skrit, crawled through first. "You're the human," Skrit said in surprise. "The soft skin who heals." "That's me. Help me get the others through." Together, they worked to move the unconscious miners. David had to compress their bodies carefully, folding limbs that wouldn't normally bend. His own hands were shredded now, leaving bloody handprints on everything he touched. The last miner through was Roth. "You came down here for us," the big reptilian said. "You're bleeding." "I'll heal. Can you move?" "Yes, but you need medical attention immediately." David shook his head. "Everyone out first, then medical." They made their way back through the emergency shaft one at a time. David went last, pushing the injured miners ahead of him. His hands screamed with pain every time he gripped a rock surface. Blood loss was making him lightheaded. Halfway up, disaster struck. A secondary collapse shook the tunnel. Rock shifted above David, and a massive boulder dropped directly onto his legs. The impact crushed both of David's legs below the knee. He felt bones snap in multiple places. His femurs fractured. His pelvis cracked with a sound like breaking ceramics. He couldn't hold back the scream this time. "David," Roth's voice came through the comm. "What happened?" "Collapse. I'm pinned. Legs are broken. Maybe worse." David fought to stay conscious through the pain. "Get everyone else to safety first, then come back for me." "We're not leaving you. Those injured miners need medical attention now. I can wait. I'll heal." "Will you?" Roth asked. "Can you heal from this?" David looked down at his crushed legs, at the massive rock that had destroyed months of recovery time. He thought about bones knitting back together, about skin regrowing, about his body's relentless drive to repair itself. "Yes," he said, "I'll heal from this too. Now go." They extracted David 4 hours after the secondary collapse. A specialized rescue team used precision cutting equipment to remove the boulder without causing further cave-ins. When they finally pulled him free, Dr. Quilvin took one look at the damage and began preparing last rites protocols for species with spiritual traditions. Both of David's legs were destroyed. The left femur had shattered into fragments. The right tibia and fibula were completely crushed. His pelvis showed multiple fracture lines radiating from the impact point. Internal bleeding filled his abdominal cavity. Muscle tissue was pulped. Nerve damage was extensive. "This is beyond regeneration," Quilvin said to Commander Atral outside the surgical bay. "No species can recover from this level of skeletal destruction. The structural framework of his lower body is gone." Atral's crystalline form dimmed with grief. "He saved 6 lives. We'll give him full honors." Inside the surgical bay, David drifted in and out of consciousness. Pain medication could only do so much against injuries this severe. He heard the medical staff talking in hushed tones, using words like irreparable and catastrophic and unsurvivable. He wanted to tell them they were wrong, but his mouth wouldn't form words. Roth sat vigil outside the surgical bay for 3 days straight. The other 5 rescued miners joined him, creating a constant presence. Station workers brought them food and water. Nobody expected David to survive long enough to need visitors, but the miners refused to leave. On the 4th day, something changed. Quilvin's monitoring equipment detected unusual activity at David's fracture sites. The doctor pulled up detailed scans and stared at the results with disbelief. The shattered bone fragments in David's legs were being absorbed. His body was breaking down the destroyed tissue and removing it from the injury sites. Simultaneously, new bone cells were forming at an incredible rate. The regeneration process had begun, but at a scale Quilvin had never witnessed. "Commander, you need to see this," Quilvin called Atral to the medical bay. "His body is rebuilding his legs, not repairing them, rebuilding them from scratch." The scans showed microscopic detail of the process. Stem cells migrated to the injury sites and differentiated into specialized bone cells. Blood vessels sprouted through the damaged tissue, creating networks to supply the growing bone. The fragments of destroyed bone were being incorporated into a protein matrix that would eventually become new, solid bone. "How long will this take?" Atral asked. "Months, maybe a year for full recovery. But Commander, he's actually doing it. He's regenerating skeletal structures that were completely destroyed." Word spread through the station faster than any official announcement. The human was healing from unsurvivable injuries. Workers gathered at the medical bay viewports again, but this time they came to witness something impossible rather than to mourn. David regained full consciousness after a week. The pain had decreased from unbearable to merely terrible. He looked at his legs, wrapped in stabilization fields and connected to dozens of monitoring devices. "How bad?" he asked Quilvin. "Both legs were destroyed. Your pelvis was fractured in 8 places. You had internal bleeding, nerve damage, and muscle destruction. You should be dead." "But I'm not." "No, you're healing. Slower than before, and the recovery will be long, but you're healing." David closed his eyes and took a slow breath. "Good, that's good." Over the following weeks, David became a living laboratory. Quilvin documented every stage of the healing process, sharing the data with medical professionals across the galaxy. The response was overwhelming. Requests flooded in from research institutions, medical centers, and military organizations. One message came from a galactic consortium representing multiple species. They wanted to speak with David directly. The representative arrived 3 months into David's recovery. Her name was Quilsk, and she had 8 limbs attached to a central body segment. She studied David with multiple eye clusters. "Your regenerative abilities have attracted significant attention," Quilsk said. "There are many situations across the galaxy where workers die because they cannot survive certain injuries. Your species could fill critical roles in rescue operations, emergency response, and hazardous exploration." David had been expecting something like this. You want humans as disposable workers for jobs too dangerous for other species. Not disposable, resilient, there's a difference. "Is there?" David asked. "Because from where I'm lying, it sounds like you want to take advantage of the fact that we can survive being broken." Quilsk's limbs rippled in a gesture David's translator couldn't interpret. "I understand your concern, but consider this. Right now, there are people dying in situations where a human could survive and help. Space station accidents, mining disasters, exploration missions gone wrong. Your ability to heal could save lives, not just your own." David thought about the 6 miners he'd rescued, about Roth and Skrit, and the others who would have died without someone who could compress through narrow spaces and endure crushing injuries. "I need guarantees," he said. "Humans aren't tools. We feel pain. We suffer during recovery. We deserve proper medical care, fair compensation, and the right to refuse dangerous assignments." "Agreed. We're proposing a formal program with full protections and benefits. Humans would be volunteers, not conscripts." "And you need to understand something else," David continued. "We can heal from almost anything, but we shouldn't have to. The goal should always be preventing injury, not relying on our ability to survive it." Quilsk's primary eye cluster focused on David. "That's exactly the attitude we need. someone who understands the difference between capability and expendability. After Quilsk left, Roth visited David in the medical bay. The big reptilian looked tired but hopeful. "Are you going to do it? Join their rescue program?" David looked at his legs. The bones had reformed enough to support limited weight. He could wiggle his toes now, though walking was still months away. The scars from his shredded hands had faded to thin white lines. "Someone has to," David said. "If humans can help, we should, but on our terms, with proper support and respect." "You're braver than any armored warrior I've ever met," Roth said. "You know that breaking doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're willing to risk yourself for others." David smiled. "We're fragile. We've always been fragile. But fragile doesn't mean powerless. It just means we have to be careful about how we use our strength." 3 months later, David took his first steps without assistance. The medical bay erupted in applause from the staff who had watched his impossible recovery. His legs held firm, rebuilt from destruction by his body's relentless drive to heal. He walked through the station corridors, past workers from a dozen species who nodded with respect. The human who couldn't be killed by breaking. The soft skin who refused to stay broken. David had accepted the position, training other humans for emergency rescue operations. The program would start small, with volunteers who understood both the capabilities and limitations of human regeneration. But first, he had one more shift to finish on the station. Standard maintenance work. Nothing heroic. Just a human doing his job, knowing that if something went wrong, his body would find a way to put itself back together. Because that's what humans did. They broke, they bled, they suffered, and then they healed and kept going. The distress signal came from a research vessel called the Wanderer, stranded in a decaying orbit around a gas giant. David had been off station for 2 weeks, setting up the human rescue training program at a galactic coordination center. When the call came through, he knew immediately that he would volunteer. Commander HFY tried to talk him out of it. "The radiation levels around that gas giant will kill most species in minutes," HFY said over the video link. "Even with protective gear, you'll be exposed to lethal doses. Your regeneration can't repair cellular damage at that scale." "Maybe not," David admitted. "But maybe it can. The Wanderer has 17 researchers on board. If I don't try, they all die when the orbit decays in 6 hours. Dr. Quilvin appeared on the screen next to HFY. "David, I've studied your biology extensively. Radiation damages DNA directly. Even if your body tries to repair it, the damage accumulates faster than regeneration can work. This isn't like broken bones or torn tissue." "I know, but I'm the only one who has even a chance of surviving long enough to reach them." The rescue ship departed 3 hours later with David aboard. The crew consisted of observers from multiple species, all expecting to document either an impossible rescue or a noble death. They treated David with solemn respect, like a soldier heading into a final battle. The ship's sensors painted a grim picture. Radiation levels around the gas giant were intense enough to scramble electronics. The Wanderer's orbit had degraded to the point where atmospheric drag was pulling it down kilometer by kilometer. In 4 hours, the ship would burn up in the giant's upper atmosphere. "The docking mechanism is frozen," the rescue ship captain explained. She was a crystalline being like HFY, her body glowing with nervous energy. "Someone has to go outside and manually override the locks. The radiation exposure for that operation would be approximately 30 minutes. 30 minutes of radiation that would kill most beings in 5. David suited up in the best protective gear available. The suit was lined with radiation shielding, but everyone knew it wasn't enough. Not for this environment, not for this long. "If you start to feel effects, abort immediately," the captain ordered. "We can't lose both you and the Wanderer's crew." David nodded and cycled through the airlock. The rescue ship had matched velocity with the Wanderer, bringing them within 50 meters of each other. David activated his maneuvering pack and crossed the gap. Radiation alarms screamed in his helmet within seconds. The invisible energy sleeted through his suit, through his body, attacking his cells at the molecular level. David gritted his teeth and focused on the docking mechanism. The manual override was located on the exterior hull, protected by a maintenance panel. David's hands shook as he worked the controls. Whether from radiation exposure or simple fear, he couldn't tell. 10 minutes in, his vision started to blur. Radiation sickness was setting in, faster than he'd expected. Nausea twisted his stomach. His skin felt like it was burning from the inside. "David, your biosigns are critical," Dr. Quilvin's voice came through the comm. "You need to abort." "Not yet, almost there." The docking mechanism released with a mechanical clunk. David pulled himself along the hull toward the airlock, each movement requiring conscious effort. His muscles were failing. His nervous system was shutting down under the radiation assault. He made it inside the Wanderer just as his legs gave out completely. The 17 researchers stared at him in horror. His face was already showing the telltale signs of severe radiation exposure. Reddened skin, burst blood vessels in his eyes, bleeding from his nose. "Get to the rescue ship," David managed to say. "All of you now." They evacuated quickly, supporting each other through the connected airlocks. David collapsed in the Wanderer's corridor, unable to move. Every cell in his body was screaming. The radiation had damaged his DNA so extensively that his cellular machinery was failing across multiple organ systems. The rescue ship's medical bay had been prepared for this. They brought David in on a stretcher and immediately began supportive care. But everyone in the room knew the truth. Radiation poisoning at this level was unsurvivable for any known species. Dr. Quilvin worked frantically anyway, because that's what doctors do. "Massive cellular damage across all tissue types," Quilvin reported. "DNA fragmentation, mitochondrial breakdown. His body's repair mechanisms are trying to respond, but the damage is too extensive." David drifted in a haze of pain and medication. He could hear voices around him but couldn't respond. His body felt like it was tearing itself apart from the inside. Maybe this was finally it. Maybe he'd found the limit of human regeneration. For 2 weeks, David existed in a state between life and death. His vital signs fluctuated wildly. Organs failed and somehow restarted. His body temperature spiked and crashed. The medical staff watched helplessly as his systems shut down one by one. But something else was happening too. Deep inside David's bone marrow, stem cells were activating in unprecedented numbers. His body had identified the radiation-damaged cells and was flagging them for replacement. The process was incredibly slow and consumed massive amounts of energy, but it was working. Dead tissue was being identified and broken down. New cells were forming to replace them. David's DNA repair mechanisms, which every human possessed but rarely used to this extent, were working around the clock to fix the genetic damage. It took 4 weeks before David opened his eyes and recognized where he was. His body had lost almost 20 kilograms. His hair had fallen out completely. His skin looked like paper, pale and fragile, but he was alive. Quilvin's bioluminescence flashed in patterns that the translator interpreted as joyful disbelief. "You survived. I don't know how, but you survived." "Did everyone else make it?" David's voice was barely a whisper. "All 17 researchers are safe, because of you." The news spread across the galactic communication networks within hours. The human who survived lethal radiation exposure. The being who could regenerate from cellular destruction. Requests for information flooded in from medical researchers, military strategists, and exploration organizations. Commander Atral visited David 6 weeks into his recovery. The crystalline commander stood at the viewport of the medical bay, watching David attempt physical therapy with trembling legs. "I've been thinking about what you represent," HFY said. "When we first met, I thought humans were fragile. I was right about that. But I was wrong about what fragility means." "What does it mean?" David asked, pausing to catch his breath. "It means you know you can be broken. Most species never face that reality because we're built to resist damage. But your entire species, you live with the knowledge that you're vulnerable, and you choose courage anyway." David managed a weak smile. "We don't have much choice. We're soft. We bleed easily. We break under pressure. So we had to learn to heal or die out as a species." "That's not survival," HFY said. "That's perseverance. There's a difference." 3 months after the radiation exposure, David stood without assistance for the first time. His hair had started growing back. His skin had regained some color. The cellular damage had been repaired so thoroughly that his medical scans looked normal again. The 17 researchers from the Wanderer attended his recovery celebration. They brought gifts from their various species, tokens of gratitude that David would treasure. But the real gift was their presence, proof that the suffering had meant something. Roth arrived from the mining station, traveling 3 days to be there. "You did it again, soft skin," the big reptilian said. "Found a way to survive the unsurvivable." "Barely," David admitted. "I don't recommend radiation poisoning as a recovery challenge." "Will you keep doing this, risking yourself for others?" David looked at the gathered crowd, aliens from dozens of species, all of whom had learned that fragility wasn't weakness. That regeneration came with a terrible price, that humans were willing to pay that price when necessary. "I'll train others," he said. "Make sure they understand what they're volunteering for. The pain, the recovery time, the scars you carry even after you heal. But yes, we'll keep doing this, because we can heal from almost anything." "That's not why you do it," Roth said quietly. "You do it because someone has to." David nodded. That was the truth that the galaxy was slowly learning. Humans weren't special because they couldn't be killed. They were special because they knew they could be killed and chose to help anyway. The training program expanded over the following year. Hundreds of humans volunteered for emergency rescue operations across the galaxy. They worked in radiation zones, collapsed structures, toxic environments, and other situations where their regenerative abilities gave them crucial advantages. But they also established strict protocols. Humans weren't disposable. They required proper medical support, adequate recovery time, and psychological counseling for the trauma of repeated injury and healing. The galaxy learned to respect human resilience without exploiting it. David eventually returned to regular work, teaching new recruits and occasionally consulting on difficult rescue operations. His body bore scars from all the injuries he'd survived. His medical file was longer than most beings accumulated in a lifetime. But he walked without a limp. His legs had healed stronger than before, reinforced by the bone regeneration process. His hands worked perfectly despite the shredded tissue from the mining rescue. Even the cellular damage from radiation exposure had been repaired so completely that it left no permanent effects. He was fragile. He would always be fragile. But fragility had taught humanity something that armored species never learned: how to fall and get back up, how to break and rebuild, how to face terrible odds and survive through sheer biological stubbornness. The aliens had called humans fragile and watched them regenerate. What they witnessed wasn't just physical healing. It was proof that the strongest beings aren't the ones who never break. They're the ones who break and refuse to stay broken, who heal and return, who learn from damage and become something more resilient than before. David looked out at the stars from the training center viewport, thinking about all the humans spreading across the galaxy. Soft-skinned, easily damaged, constantly healing beings who would never match other species for physical durability. But they would always exceed them in one crucial way: the courage to be vulnerable and the strength to recover from it. That was humanity's gift to the galaxy. Not invulnerability, but the knowledge that being breakable didn't mean being defeated. It just meant you had one more chance to prove that healing is the most powerful force in the universe.